So I've been doing some coverage recently about Japan, and it's been going rather well actually. And in fact, the Japanese have taken note. And so I wanted to do a segment basically explaining multiculturalism and its consequences and how it's been a disaster for the human race. Unintentionally quoting Uncle Ted there. But the point being here that they've taken our segment and translated it here into Japanese, and you can see in the space of 2 days 131,000 views, and there are lots of comments here. Like there's one here: why are foreigners more worried than Japanese politicians? They've discovered that one, you know. Why is it that these podcasters care more about the well-being of people than our actual politicians? Well, let me tell you, Japan, that is true of all Western politicians as well. This is how they get you. This is the formula. And it does seem to be a formula that sort of gets rolled out in whichever country that is being colonized by NGOs, basically.
And corporations.
And corporations,
What's
yes.
very important to say, because your last segment was excellent, I'm glad they translated
Thank
it,
you.
is that a source who spoke to the Japanese government told me part of the reason they're doing this is to attract more corporate investment to alleviate their debt crisis. And the corporations are coming in and saying, right, well, we've got transgender employees. We want to hire the best possible workers. So you have to liberalize your gender and your immigration laws in order for us to put a headquarters in Tokyo. And so the government is going along with this. They're instituting ruinous social policies for Japan to attract more capital investment. But that's obviously only a short-term thing because, as we know, the kinds of migrants that are going to be brought in are going to be net tax dependents, and the Japanese taxpayer is going to be kept paying for all of these costs and going to be seeing higher crime rates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the solution isn't more mass immigration, by the way. The solution is reforming the economic system, which relies too much on lent money, really. It needs to be streamlined and made as efficient as possible. That is how you get a flourishing economy. You should be, trading a lot. That is how you get yourself out of this situation. It is not by doing this, because as you'll see throughout the segment, it is not worth it. And yes, actually a lot of Japanese people in the comments were unaware of a lot of the things going on, and so I wanted to explain it in sort of give you a nice big overview of the kind of things we've covered for years now, because it's sort of second nature to us to talk about it, but to an outsider perhaps it seems a bit more difficult to understand. And I'm going to use the UK as an example, not only because that's where I live and have grown up my entire life, but I sort of see Japan as the Britain of the East, and so it's a good equivalent, an island nation that values politeness and orderliness, that interested in the preservation of your heritage, both known for liking tea and gardening as well, just coincidentally. And it also seems like a very nice place as well, and it has this aspect to it that it reminds me a little bit of home away from home.
It certainly felt like it when I was there. It's the reason I'm going back there for my honeymoon. My missus speaks fluent Japanese. We love the country, and we would like Japan to remain Japanese. Therefore, the Japanese people must preserve both their culture and their role as an unquestionable demographic majority, because if either of them slip, Japan becomes less Japanese, and it becomes less of the beautiful place that we greatly admire.
So it's also worth mentioning as well, we're an alternative media organisation, and we have to support ourselves via subscriptions to our website and through merch. And so we've recently got a US election line, as that's coming up. So if you did want to support our work, you can buy some of these very cool t-shirts and mugs. So please do that if you could. And so Japan might think of something like this when they think of England. So this is obviously a real place. This is Pulteney Bridge in Bath, which I actually live around the corner from at one point. And so there are places similar to how Japan imagines Britain, but they're becoming fewer and fewer. And the places that are like this are being run down, basically. And there are a whole host of reasons for that. And one of them is that the people who made these things, the culture in which it was created, is being pushed out of many of these areas. And so if we have a look at the census here, this was taken in 2021, and the dark blue represents basically the white areas, as in the Europeans, and then the other colours represent... hang on, I'll get rid of that first. It'll be a bit easier to see. Okay, there we go. So you can see here that a lot of the migration has gone to economic centres, so areas where people can make the most money. And that's because a lot of the migration isn't migration to the UK because they really like our way of life and have respect for us. It's that they want to extract resources from us. They want to make money. They're sort of have a mercenary-like attitude. And you see this reflected in the kind of areas in which they live, which have been fundamentally changed. And you can go to areas of London now, and you can find that in some areas, in fact, here's Hackney, famous part of London. There are parts of it that are very highly dense with minorities. There's one, minority majority, just to find it off the top of my head. But there are places in lots of areas of London that have it. Birmingham as well. Whitechapel's a good example. That's somewhere around here, isn't it?
It's East London. It's important to note.
There we go. Well. Tower Hamlets. There's 28%. There are some where it's only like 10% of people are white. And that's not even just including white British as well. That could mean any Europeans at all. And so we've pretty much lost our capital city now. I think only about a third of the population of London is it white British or just white more generally?
White British.
White British. So we are now a minority in our own capital city. And this is playing out in lots of major cities as well. And you can see here Nottingham, Manchester, Leeds.
Nottingham is 50%.
Yeah, this is, and you can see the sort of point of injury here. It's sort of London, and it's spreading out like a rash across the rest of England. You can even see in Wales, Cardiff there, and there are a few places in the southwest that are far away enough that they're far removed, similar to Scotland, which you can't see here. But there's been a massive demographic shift, and it's changed the very nature of the United Kingdom because British people are becoming increasingly a minority, and that we might see a situation, if this carries on, where we become a minority in our own country, which would be a tragedy for our culture, for the people, for the continuation of about 10,000 years of work from our ancestors to create the Britain that we know and love.
So 2 things on that. When immigration was lower before 2019, the date at which the white British would become a minority in Britain was 2066. Mm-hmm. So it would be exactly 1,000 years since the Norman conquest. It's now going to be earlier than that. But by 2083, Britain is due to be 54% first generation immigrant. Not just not white British, not just not born here, first generation immigrant. That's not a country anymore. That's an economic zone that people come and go from. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to see the same fate to befall Japan, let alone here.
So we were promised that this was all done for economic reasons, and that's how it's being proposed in Japan. But it's now finally being openly admitted that migration to the UK has failed to boost any economic growth in the first place. This is now pretty much common knowledge, yet it still continues because no one knows how to stop it. Well, no one in the mainstream, and there's not also the will to change it. So it's also worth pointing out as well, most popular baby names. Mohammed is the most popular boy's name yet again for 2023. And yes, I wonder why that is. Is it anything to do with the large Muslim population that the native British taxpayers have to support because a lot of them don't work? It's just ridiculous. And so you can see... You'd think that if we're doing so much for these migrant communities, that they would be at least a bit reverent towards the host population and grateful, as, anyone who does you a favour, makes your life tangibly better. If you're a normal, healthy person, you show them gratitude. You go out of your way to treat them with respect. And that's not what happens. Here's the Leeds riots. And you might notice from the video, a lot of these people are not British. What happened here was... The social services went to take a child away from a family that was not raising them in conditions that we saw fit to be raising children. They're basically abusing their children. And the local area refused the authority of the social services. Then the police came in to restore order, and then they set fire to police vehicles and actually drove the police out of the area. and they set fire to things. This is how we are treated in our own country. And what they're doing is they're rejecting our authority in these zones because they are now the majority in some areas. And they're saying, we don't need you to govern us. And we saw this in some of the riots in August as well, whereby they said, we don't need your police protection. These were Muslims, because they had weapons, they had knives, and they went out and they went to look for people, and they did find people, and they attacked people.
What we need to say here, because we're talking about multiculturalism, and a lot of people don't know, is that multiculturalism is not the idea that people from anywhere around the world can go to another place and assimilate and integrate into the culture. Multiculturalism is precisely the claim that people shouldn't do this, and people from different groups should have different ways of life. Now, there are many groups. Whenever we're talking about the entire globe, there are many cultures, many people who have many customs and many ways of life. But what happens is that a lot of people are thinking that their own way of life should be higher than the law of the country to which they immigrate. So that's one of the major areas of problem when it comes to multiculturalism, is that people from the left are being told that you should come here, and people from here, the indigenous people, shouldn't demand from you to respect the rules. You can play by your own rules. So at some point they will say, well, we are going to play by our own rules when it comes to safety as well.
Mm-hmm. So a good example of this as well, and how also these groups come in and then replace the native culture, this is from Notting Hill Carnival. This used to be a carnival for native British Londoners, and it was taken over by people from the Caribbean and Africa, and has now become a source of crime. So in London more generally, knife and gun murders have been increasing pretty rapidly, and there's almost always cases at these events of knife and gun crime. This didn't used to happen, okay? Crime was very, very rare in Britain until we opened it up to these foreign mercenaries.
Police officers are sexually assaulted every year. There have been acid attacks. People have died. It is violent, and yet it is sponsored by the very multicultural Muslim mayor of London.
And so it's also worth pointing out as well that not all people behave exactly the same. For example, black Londoners make up just 13% of the population, but are responsible for 61% of knife murders and 63% of gun crimes, which is a massive overrepresentation. And so that should be taken, as we need to be very careful importing people like this into our country, if at all. Also, the grooming gangs, largely a Pakistani phenomenon. Entire communities were implicated in this, the entirety of the Pakistani community in all these various areas. This is just some of them. It happened across England. It's still going on now because a lot of them have gone unprosecuted, likely tens of thousands of them roaming free. There are stories of them running into their victims in things like shopping centres and things like that, and their victims being overcome with anxiety because the person who abused them, and there was a racial element, they targeted white girls, and they were largely Pakistani men. That doesn't get talked about enough. And none of them have been deported. None of them have been removed from the country. They have no right to be here. And yet, because of human rights lawyers and things like that, they're allowed to stay because they'll be persecuted in their foreign country, which I think is actually a good thing. I don't even think they should be alive if they do these sorts of things.
In the last trial, one of the victims gave a witness statement. She spoke to the men that had abused her as a child, and she was asked to censor her statement because she requested to have them deported after they finished their prison sentence. And as to the numbers, in the last year, there was a task force set up by the previous government just to identify victims and perpetrators. They found 4,000 victims and 1,500 perpetrators in 1 year. Imagine how many more there are.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? And it's even being admitted by our state media that the police left children at the mercy of the gangs because they were scared of being called racist, because the police didn't do their job because they were worried about the backlash against them if they targeted these communities, even though they were doing this in the first place. And in fact, 20% of child abuse victims are involved with these gangs, so the extent is massive.
Bear in mind, the Asian population, which also counts Japanese people who are not doing these crimes. I don't think there's the Japanese register on our crime charts at all.
No, they don't, no.
what they mean is Pakistani, but the total Asian population is 8%. So the victims of this crime are 20% of all child sexual exploitation crimes. That is, again, a vast overrepresentation that is not being punished.
And also there is the whole apparatus of the mainstream media and the state who are literally demonizing everyone who speaks about it.
So I need to pick up the pace a little bit because I've been going on for a while. So it's worth mentioning as well, I don't know who's highlighting my notes, but please stop. Here is London. So 36.8% of London's population identified as white British, which is lower than the national average of 78.4%. And now it's to the point where you need a salary of 3 times the national average to even be able to buy a house, which is absurd because it's so overpopulated, right?
This is me right now. I can't find anything on the market that is suitable, that is not a wreck, and combined, me and my missus are making over 6 figures. It's impossible to get somewhere.
And it's also worth mentioning as well that there are gangs, largely foreign gangs, they're actually on like motorized bicycles and scooters going around just stealing people's phones in the street, and there's not really a lot that can be done about this because there's just so many of them. You know, the police do catch them sometimes. I've seen footage of police cars knocking them off their bikes and things like that, which is great, but it's just so widespread that they can't stop it, and this never used to happen either.
The majority of police forces in England and Wales haven't solved a single burglary in the last year.
I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
They do lock people up for tweets.
And of course, the crime rate as well. Obviously, there's a bit of a dip for the lockdowns because no one was out and about. But you can see, just since 2015, there is a pretty significant increase in just general crime rate per 1,000 of the population. And so per capita crime is rising. It's pretty obvious that it's just becoming a worse place to live. It's expensive and ridden with crime. Who wants to live there? Well, apparently foreign mercenaries, and that's about it. It's also worth mentioning, while they're here, they disrespect our heritage. So Black Lives Matter, which you might have heard of in the, for the United States movement, was a big thing because there is a significant black population in the UK now, and this has led an alliance between minorities and communists, both of which hate Britain, tearing down statues. And here they illegally tore down a statue and threw it in a river. And they didn't receive any prison time for this because our political regime tacitly approves. But I think that tearing down statues is a sign that you are possessed of ideology to the point whereby you've stopped respecting those who came before. And, the person whose statue it was, they were a former slaver. However, they had a statue because they did a lot of philanthropic work and invested in the local area. That's why they had the statue. There is nuance to historical characters that gets lost if you tear them down and throw them into a river. And it's also worth mentioning as well that our history is desecrated by trying to write in people that were never here. So they're trying to claim that in 1,000 years ago there were still black people here. Even in the Roman times, 2,000 years ago, that black people, they were always here, and so you should accept them being here now because it's always been the case. It's just a lie. They're making it up. There's no historical basis. There's no evidence for this. And you see it as well in TV representations of things. So here is Anne Boleyn, famous wife to Henry VIII, one of the kings of England, portrayed by an African woman. Why? Because they want to push this into our faces. They want to make us ashamed to be who we are and to revere our colonizers, basically. And so if we wanted to do anything about it, there is the Equality Act, which makes it legal for employers to discriminate against the native population in favour of foreigners. This has legal basis to discriminate against the native population, the people who have the most claim to these islands. And if you want to complain about it online, there's this act here, which makes it a crime to point out the people doing this to us and things like that. And if you want to do it in person, there's also the Public Order Act, which if someone takes offence to something that you say, however reasonable, even if it's based in fact, you can be arrested for just simply hurting their feelings. The same with the Communications Act. It's based on whether you hurt people's feelings, and sometimes being completely honest and being factual about the state of reality gets you in trouble and makes you do prison time.
This was the piece of legislation that I was threatened with arrest for. There is footage of this online because I stood outside talking about the LGBT activists, and I said the word insidious, and a police officer thought I was insulting a woman and came over and said, if you keep talking, I will arrest you. This doesn't prosecute you if you say things in your own home, only outside. But another piece of legislation, which is a non-crime hate incident that records the things you say in person or offline that can stop you from getting a job, now doesn't matter whether or not you said the thing indoors in your own home, on the internet, or in public, you will still have this black mark against you. So we literally police thought crimes here in the UK.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth mentioning as well, the UK had a general election, and this was our opportunity to deal with the immigration situation, and there was a left-wing sort of socialistic landslide because the right-wing party was so corrupt that they were very unpopular, and the Reform Party was the main party campaigning on immigration, and they only got 5 seats in our parliament, which has 650. But if you look at the percentage of votes relative, it's being strange, but if you look at the percentage of votes, Reform got 14%, but only got 5 seats. Whereas if you look at the Liberal Democrats, they got 12%, so about 2% less, but they got 72 seats. The way the political system operates seems very ineffective at reflecting national mood. And it's worth pointing out as well, even mainstream outlets were saying immigration is the key issue, and we didn't get it addressed. And it's to the point where 9 in 10 constituencies want tougher controls on immigration. And if you remember the demographics before, the areas in red here that want an increase in numbers or relaxed controls are where the immigrants already are the majority. So all of the native British areas, we are the majority that want to stop immigration, but it's being imposed upon us anyway.
This survey as well came out, and it said that the people that voted for less immigration underestimated the number of immigrants coming in by a factor of 10. So we have net immigration of 700,000 people added to the population every year. It's total about 1.2, 1.3.
About a 1% population growth a year because of immigration.
And the people that said we want to reduce immigration thought it was only 70,000. So if they knew the real figures, imagine how angry people would be.
Exactly. And it's worth pointing out as well, because there is an incoming election. I believe it's on the 27th of October, so please bear this in mind in Japan. You have the potential to do something about it before it's too late, because what has been done to the UK is an utter tragedy. It's why I'm here doing this right now. I was going to be an academic. I was going to be, a university lecturer, but I left because I saw this as far, far more important, because it's the fate of my entire country rather than, just furthering scientific research, which can wait. But this is a fight for the very essence of Europe and North America. We cannot allow this to continue. You cannot allow it to continue in Japan, because it is a tragedy. I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, we had a roundtable discussion on the legacy of Tolkien. We even had Luca Johnson in, who was a bit of a Tolkien scholar. It was really, really good, really nourishing, and if you want to see all the other stuff that we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.